Welcome back, Hnrs. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our countdown to the end of your flipped classroom. We literally have 3 flips, counting this one, left in the entire course, right as my dog tries to screw up everything and knock my computer off the pillows. Now, biggest thing about it, though, is we're going to pick up right where we left in class, talking about the end of World War I, Pierre. Now, going into it, though, we have to understand. Also, quick shout out to all of y'all that were concerned about the surprise party. It went off without a hitch. She's taking it to her grave. We love to see it. All right, so here we go. Going into it, though, what we need to understand is that we are picking up right where we left off in class, talking about the end of World War I, right? And so we left off in class talking about the differences between Woodrow Wilson's idealist 14 points and the Treaty of Versailles, right? Woodrow Wilson's 14 points that were like, hey, let's not blame anyone for this war. It's probably not very smart. Compared to the Treaty of Versailles being like, let's blame Germany directly for this war and lead to another war. Because that was the whole problem, right? Woodrow Wilson felt that this Treaty of Versailles, with its war guilt clause, its German reparations, its giving up of German colonies, that was a big thing as well, that Germany was forced to kind of give up all their imperial gains that everybody else had been making as well, when everybody should have given up their imperial gains, not just Germany, but also German demilitarization. For those of you who don't know what the word demilitarization means, it means reducing the size of your military significantly, to the point to where like you can barely even fight a war even if you wanted to, right? So also they created Poland, which is a big thing as well, out of what was left of like Eastern Prussia. And then also they're going to create this thing called the demilitarized Rhineland, right? What I need you to do is highlight Rhineland. For those of you who want to write something down now, right, for like the kids in class that are always really asking great questions and want to make sure they know stuff up front, totally respect that, right? So the Rhineland is the western part of Germany that borders France, right? And basically it was the idea that Germany would never be allowed to put a military in that area close to France ever again, right? So the thing about it is, with all these premises, right, and then the creation of this Weimar Republic, this new republic that came after Kaiser Wilhelm ran away, the thing about it was is that it was just left severely weak, and a lot of blame was put on Germany, and their economy would never be able to survive this. And Wilson was like, yo, this is just going to lead to another war, right? And that's why the United States, highlight this, never ratified the Treaty of Versailles. Now, that's really important. We never ratified it, and we didn't fully accept it. And then a League of Nations would be created. A little bit of an olive branch would come from the Europeans. They would be like, look, but Wilson, we love your idea about a League of Nations. We're going to create one, right? We're going to make a League of Nations, just like you offered to. And Wilson was like, is Germany invited? And they were like, no! And then so, like, Germany wasn't even invited in it at all, right? And also not the USSR, and also a lot of other people as well. And so they were like, this is not what we wanted at all. So the United States did not join that League of Nations at first either. What also is going to happen, though, is the maps of Europe would be critically redrawn, right? You have to understand that like there's going to be several empires that get dissolved and several different areas that no longer exist after this, including places like, for example, the Ottoman Empire would be broken up into Turkey and several other areas, right? You've got the creation of Yugoslavia. You have Czechoslovakia, which no longer exists on the map, and also right there, the creation of Poland. So as you can see, the maps would be severely redrawn after World War I, leading to a very, very new, interesting dynamic in the continent that we're going to have to deal with, both socially, politically, and economically, right? Now, what we're moving into now, though, is going to be a very significant time period that's going to really, really help you explain a lot and understand the world setting behind what some of you refer to as the Roaring Twenties, right? So what we're now moving into is this thing called the interwar years, or the Age of Anxiety, right? From 1920 to 1939. Now, when we refer to this as the Age of Anxiety, we have to understand that in the United States, many people called it the Roaring Twenties, right? Now, that's going on mostly in the U.S., right? The Roaring Twenties, of course, that is made up of all of the dancing and the flappers and the Charleston and all the stuff that you know very, very well that has to do with like the Roaring Twenties that kind of exists at the Great Gatsby-esque era, right? So you can see like a lot of different things like the rise of a consumer economy, right? Because in the United States, a lot of money was being made, right? A ton of money actually was being made. So in a lot of this, like you could see it kind of develop and foster into imagery that directly kind of demonstrates why the Roaring Twenties was so prosperous, right? Because people were now buying vehicles, because Henry Ford is going to actually create the Model T Ford, which is going to be one of the very first and most popular selling automobile models ever. And it was affordable, and a lot of people could actually work a job and then buy one or two, maybe even. There was also a consumer economy where you could buy new appliances and kitchen goods, or a new radio for your home, or you could go to this new place called the drugstore and you could get a bunch of different stuff from your pharmacy, right? You could also go to the movie and you could, or go to, not the movie, you could go to the cinema and you could see a movie movie, right? Now, the movies early on in the 1920s were silent, right? And of course, they're not going to actually have any kind of dialogue. They're going to have music playing in the background while somebody's running around the screen. Movies like, for example, Nosferatu, which is one of the most famous of all movies that ever came out in the early 1920s. It's a movie about Dracula. And then you've got this guy who's a very famous actor that perfectly represents the silent film era. That is Charlie Chaplin, right? Charlie Chaplin, very well known for a lot of different amazing movies and stuff like that. Like this clip right here of a movie called Modern Times, where they actually used a camera trick to make it look like Charlie Chaplin was like skating really close to the edge of this barrier, right? He actually has connection to the circus from his young life, and he was apparently a very popular actor. Not apparently, he was an extremely popular actor, if not the most popular and most money-making actor during the 1920s. Now, also, you saw the radio pop up as well. If you couldn't go to the cinema and you didn't have a television, because television didn't really exist yet, the radio was something that every single family would huddle around every single night and listen to programs and different kind of comic books and different, not like comic books, but like the first superheroes were ever like their stories were told on the radio, right? For example, Dick Tracy started as like an actual radio drama. And also you saw this new imagery in the 1920s of this new version of a woman, right? That is coming after the late 1800s feminist movements through strikes and different kinds of protest marches, and also from injecting their labor into the economy during World War I. You're going to see this new image of the world, or the new woman, come up at the end of the 1800s, right? This woman could vote as of the 1920s in America. She could work and she made her own money. She danced, right? The image of her is commonly known as the flapper, right? Wearing a short like dress and exposing like more skin than they ever have before. And also, she even smoked in public, which was crazy, right? For the time. I mean, there's a very new image of the world and the United States economy that's going on. But a question that we have to ask ourselves is why? Where was all this coming from? Why was the Roaring Twenties so prosperous? A lot of it has to do with several key factors, like including assembly line production, which is going to create goods and products faster than they've ever been made. The 5-day work week would come around, which would actually create several days during the week, Monday through Friday, where one would go to work and make their money, and then on the weekends, Saturday, Sunday, they go spend that money, injecting that money back into the economy, because that's a big element. Leisure time. Leisure time became a very, very big thing in America and in the economy that was booming after the World War I finally ended. And what we have to understand is that all these things combined, all this stuff over here, created a very strong and consistently growing, not garwing, whatever the heck I just typed down there, a consistently growing economy, okay? Now that's something to keep in the back of your mind. How do we measure the growth of the economy? By the movement of the stock market. And during the 1920s, you could just guarantee, it seemed, that the stock market would always go up, because that assembly line, that 5-day work week, that leisure time, and all these new things you could go out and buy were combining together to create a really rock solid economy, especially in America. But when we look actually at the Roaring Twenties that's going down in the United States, we actually look at the era that's going on in Europe as the age of anxiety, right? So like now you have to understand, for Europe, it was much different than it was for America, because they had just got done with a worldwide war that had claimed the lives of 10 million people, right? And you also have to understand that there's some massive lingering issues following the war that actually were even present before the war, including things like anti-Semitism, which is the like literal hatred and like dissatisfaction and racism towards people of the Jewish faith, right? You also had racism, right? And this actually applies not only to Europe, but especially to America as well. At the time, during the 1920s, schools were still segregated. Neighborhoods were segregated. People of like color were not allowed to do certain things, and they even had violence committed against them. For example, right here, that is a picture of the Tulsa Race Massacre that occurred in Oklahoma, where the Greenwood District was completely destroyed by a group of white like protesters and like literal marauders, because they thought that a guy like had grabbed a woman on his way out of an elevator when he didn't. He was actually tripping and falling and was trying not to fall, right? It's a whole story that we'll talk about in class. It's absolutely wild what ended up happening. But the Tulsa Race Massacre is a great example of the racism that was actually occurring. There was lynchings that were happening in the American South, where literally mobs of people were committing justice, is what they called it, even though it wasn't at all, and literally like going out and arresting people of color and then executing them via hangings. And it took the works of this woman named Ida B. Wells to actually start writing about it, to expose it to the rest of the country. And also you had the other creepy thing growing, the movement of eugenics, right? And eugenics is actually a very twisted version of Darwin's theories of natural selection and evolution. What it is a pseudoscience. For those of you who do not know what the word pseudoscience means, it means it's a fake science. It's not really based in fact whatsoever, and it actually is based on flawed reason. It's a pseudoscience that aims at trying to create a genetically superior race by excluding people who are judged to be inferior. This could be people of color. This could be people of different religions. This could be people of different races. This could be people of different mental faculties. This could be different people of different sexual orientations. And the eugenics movement would grow exponentially during the 1920s, right? And what that's going to lead to is the thinking that Hitler would adopt during the Holocaust, mass sterilization campaigns that went down in California. And you also have to couple all this terrible stuff that's going on in society during the roaring 20s, right? So like now, and also during the age of anxiety in Europe, and couple that with the fact that men are coming home from a war like they never had before, completely disfigured, right? Like, so the war, since it was so technologically advanced during World War I, would completely change the lives of men after this war, right? Some of them would come home with their entire bodies burned. Some of them came home blinded by mustard gas. Many of them are coming back now as well with amputated and missing limbs. This is a great example right here of a woman that actually dealt with these people, and I want you to write her name down because I think she's very, very important, because it's important to talk about women's history in the stalwart and understanding of this time period. And that right there is a woman named Anna, A-N-N-A, Coleman, C-O-L-E-M-A-N, Ladd, L-A-D-D, right? Anna Coleman Ladd was actually this woman who literally dedicated her life to creating prosthetics for World War I veterans so that they could actually go on with the rest of their lives. For example, this man was actually hit either by an artillery shell or an incendiary device of some type, and it scarred his entire face. And so she made him a prosthetic that he could actually wear on his face so he could then go out in society, and he even had like a space where he could actually smoke out of it and stuff like that, which is absolutely awesome that she did that and dedicated her life to these veterans. But what we need to understand about these veterans who are coming home so disfigured, scarred, and also showing the earliest signs of a condition called shell shock, which was the earliest known cases of PTSD. Why would these people, these 23 million injured veterans, be prone to radicalized ideas, right? A lot of it has to do with the fact that these men are looking for someone to blame for their hardship and for the issues that are now going on in Europe. And that's going to let people like Hitler and Mussolini come to power very drastically, right? Because the age of anxiety, not only are these men coming back with injuries, not only is the eugenics movement growing, not only is anti-Semitism and racism running rampant, you have to also understand that economic hardships are hitting places like Germany and Italy in the wake of the war, right? They are experiencing things like hyperinflation. Due to the reparations that Germany had to pay, their government, the Weimar Republic, was printing money like crazy to try and pay off their war debt, leading to the massive amount of inflation that we've talked about before in places like Spain and Rome as well when it was falling, leading to money being so worthless that you could see children playing with it as like if it were a Jenga game in the streets, right? Also, they had massively high unemployment because their industrial sectors were so affected by the war. Businesses were failing and going out of business. Savings were being destroyed because of the hyperinflation. And weak governments like the Weimar Republic are just printing money like crazy, leading to even further problems. So you have to understand, couple the situation of these World War I veterans with the fact that they're coming home and their money is completely ruined, is going to lead to the rise of fascism in a lot of different areas, right? Now, what fascism is, okay, is this is actually connecting back to one of our earliest units. The word itself comes from that Roman image right there, that thing of the fasces, right? The iron, like the axe that's got wooden rods wrapped around it that's supposed to actually show the strength of the people and their government together. And this image is also on the back of the Senate Hall in America. Now, we're not a fascist government. But what we have to understand, though, is that this image was used as an image of strong government power. But what's going to happen in the 1920s is you're going to see the rise of fascist parties. Now, what fascist parties are far-right, ultra-nationalist groups characterized by the forcible suppression of the opposition. Now, what we're saying here is super conservative governments that are ultra-nationalist, and they characterize themselves by blaming other people for their hardships and forcibly suppressing them, right? They emphasize strict obedience to the state and a suppression of the opposition to promote the country or a superior race. And the 1920s is going to see a dramatic rise in fascist leaders. Now, the word fascism actually comes from this guy right here, who's actually from Italy, and his name is Benito Mussolini. He's actually the very first person to call the fascist government of Italy the fascist government. And that guy right there, Benito Mussolini, who becomes the prime minister of Italy, became the prime minister in 1925, a mere 5 years into the 1920s when he marches on Rome with a giant group of people called black shirts that are all disaffected and dissatisfied veterans from World War I. And he said, oh, it's not your fault that we lost this war. It's the weak government's fault because they gave up, right? And so you have to well, actually they didn't give up. They actually switched sides. But still, he's like, it's the government's fault for not being as like true to Italian people, and we should be isolationists and just only focus on Italy and da 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 da. You have to understand, things never go well when a government focuses to inward, when it's not a part of the world at large, right? And that's also going to lead to leaders like Hitler coming to power, and then this guy as well, not Francisco Franco, who's going to come to power in Spain, right? So going further, you have to understand, though, as now couple all those problems together, do you see why the 1920s was called the Age of Anxiety in Europe? Because you have fascist leaders on the rise during terrible economics and everything else. Now, we have another guy, though, that we got to talk about, and that guy's name is Joseph Stalin, all right? Who's going to take a very different approach to this. But during the 1920s, he's going to be the leader of the Soviet Union, all right? Oftentimes referred to as the Man of Steel, right? Because Joseph Stalin is not his real name. Like, his actual real name was Losif Dazhgashvili, and he's from Georgia. Not Georgia, the state, not like peaches and stuff, but Georgia, the country. And you have to understand is he actually is going to create this thing underneath Lenin, and along with Vladimir Lenin in Russia, known as the NEP, okay? Now, don't write that down. It's not important. You don't need NEP under Lenin. But what you have to understand is he was one of like Lenin's right-hand men. It's just something I forgot to delete. So like it's one of Lenin's right-hand men, okay? Because there were two guys that helped Lenin come to power in Russia and create the Soviet Union during the Russian Revolution. One is Joseph Stalin, the guy we're talking about right now, and the other one is Leon Trotsky, the other guy that we've talked about in the past. Well, what's going to end up happening is Stalin is going to force Trotsky out, and he's going to end up taking over as the new Soviet premier after Lenin dies in 1924. And he's going to try and attack the two biggest issues that are going on in the Soviet Union after it's been established: massive unemployment and large-scale famine. Now, how does he do this? One, he tries to attack the famine first, and he tries to do that by doing it in a communist style using authoritarianism. And what he does is collectivize agriculture. He wants to create giant state-owned farms, but to get that, he's got to take it away from middle-class farmers, and those people are called kulaks, right? What a kulak is in Russian, it's a Russian word for fist, right? And why they're called fist is because it's basically the idea that they're clutching resources away from the people inside of their hands. So what Stalin is going to do, along with Lenin when he actually started this campaign, is demonize those middle-class farmers, strip away their land, and have them executed or sent to gulags, right? Because that's a part of the first part of what is known as his Great Purge, right? A chance to try and purge out as many people as he could. Just to give you all a heads up, during Stalin's Great Purges, he killed a total of 36 million people. And like Hitler killed 11 million. So if you're really kind of funny enough to look at this, he's just as bad as the rest of his guys. Even though he's not a fascist, he's a communist, right? It's a little bit different. Now, going into it though, he kills a massive number of kulaks, but the famine's actually going to get worse, and 10 million are going to die as a result of that. Now, when we look at this was a bad idea, Stalin, so everybody got pretty upset with him. They're like, well, you made this decision. And he was like, oh, well, it's not my fault. And he started blaming his own Bolshevik party members and having them sent to these things called the gulags. What a gulag is a forced Soviet labor work camp, much like the concentration camps that were actually opened in Germany. And what he would have done is he would send Bolshevik party members of his own staff, to these gulags as political criminals, right? Now, if we look at this picture right here that was originally published in the Soviet Union, you got Stalin and 3 of his assistants, right? But look what happened when they published it about a year later. It's Stalin and just those 2 guys. And then it's Stalin and just that one guy. And then it's just Stalin, because all 3 of these dudes were sent away during the Great Purge to those gulags where they were forced to work to death, right? Now, the next thing he had to tackle, though, with his 5-year plan was the unemployment problem, right? And the unemployment problem that he wants to try and identify, he wants to hyper-industrialize, right? What he does is he builds up factories all over Russia, okay? And what he would do is he would build a factory and then basically build a city around the outside of it, right? For example, Stalingrad was a city that was started that had a tractor plant in the middle of it. Magnitogorsk was one that was started that had a steel plant in the middle of it. And the coal mines of Ural were actually started as well that had a coal mine in the middle of it. And so what he would do, though, is build these cities around these factories to mass employ workers. And what's crazy is this actually worked, right? And production in the Soviet Union went up 150%, right? Rised drastically. But then what you have to understand is while fascism is rising in places like Germany and Italy, and while communist regimes are being used in places like the Soviet Union under Stalin, you have to understand what's going to happen next is this year known as 1929. Now, for those of you who do not know what happened in 1929, stop living under a rock, right? What is going to happen in 1929 is this thing known as the Great Stock Market Crash, where the United States is going to end its period known as the Roaring Twenties and end up in just as much of a bad situation as the rest of Europe at the time and the rest of the West. The Great Stock Market Crash on October 29th, 1929, also known as Black Tuesday, is going to be caused for a couple of different reasons, right? Now, why did this happen? A lot of it has to do with overproduction. So remember when I said at the beginning of this flip, America was like using assembly line production, the 5-day work week and leisure time, and all this stuff was going together to make a consumer market where you could go out and buy things? Well, here's the issue that ended up happening. They made too many things you could buy, right? If you make too much stuff and you overproduce it, people aren't going to buy 5 cars. They're going to buy 2 and they're going to stop, right? And so what ended up happening is the factories kept producing over and over and over again, but they had lots full of unsold cars. What happens to a company's profits when they're not selling anything? They begin to go down, right? Now, here's the other kicker. While a bunch of these companies start defaulting and while a bunch of their shares start getting sold off, people had been betting on the stock market using loaned money. That's called playing the market on credit. Because remember, what did I tell you at the very beginning? Those things combine together to create a very steadily growing stock market. Well, a lot of people are like, well, I'm going to go to the bank and I'm going to get a loan and I'm going to buy stock with it. And then eventually I'm going to sell that stock and then I'm going to keep the profit, right? Because it's always going up. Well, here's the issue. When the market plummeted because of the overproduction, people now owe that money back, but they lost it all. And so the panic caused banks to run out of money because you remember the Medici family? What is the biggest premise of a bank? That not everyone's going to show up on the exact same day and demand their money back? Well, they did, right? And right after October 29th, when the market crashed, everybody wanted their money back. The banks ran out of money to give them, closed, and people's entire life savings were gone, right? And so welcome to this thing known as the Great Depression, right? Which we will talk about in class. But I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.